Hello, everybody, and welcome to EVA England's Chargepoint Chat with the fantastic Ade Adepitan. My name is Jill Noel, and I'm one of the directors of Electric Vehicle Association England. I've been around electric cars for almost a decade now, and I'm really passionate about helping drivers to make the switch to EV. Before we hand over to Ade, I'd like to just run through a few slides with you, just a little bit of background about EVA England, what we've been up to, and what our plans for the future hold. We'll have a brief clip of some of Ade's very recent work, and then I'll hand over to EVA England's Vice Chair, Alan Cooklin, to introduce Ade. After we've heard from Ade, there'll be a few minutes of Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let me go into a few slides. What I would say is if you have any questions, then please do pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to cover them towards the end. So, EVA England offers a voice to both current and prospective electric car drivers in England. It actually started as a Chargepoint chat between two people, Bridget Phelps, who is now chair of EVA England, and Alan Cooklin, who you'll meet shortly, who is our vice chair. Bridget and Alan bumped into each other at a Chargepoint and started discussing public charging infrastructure in England and decided to do something about it. They brought together a number of other really passionate EV drivers, myself included, and we started meeting over Zoom at the beginning of lockdown last year. We haven't actually all met in person, and I can't wait to do so. We incorporated EVA England as a community interest company in June 2020. EVA England is non-profit and all of us as directors are volunteers. Most of us also have day jobs. We have one paid member of staff, thank goodness, and I hope more to come. So the road so far for EVA England. In the past year, we launched to members in March this year. We took a little bit of time to do that because we wanted to have a really robust customer management system in place to manage our members. Actually, before that, last year, we launched a survey to EV drivers to try and understand what prospective members of EVA England would want from an association like ours. And we've done our very best to shape EVA England and benefits to members on that feedback. We've also run 2 online surveys covering over 2,000 electric car drivers in England. And these surveys have fed into 2 really important government consultations. The first one being on the phase-out date of petrol and diesel cars and light vans, and the second more recent consultation on the consumer experience of public electric vehicle charging. So we took all those survey responses, packaged them up into 2 reports and delivered those reports to government to feed into those consultations. We're very proud as well to be a founding member of the Global Electric Vehicle Alliance, or GEVA. EVA England is one of 37 EV driver associations from across 26 countries and counting, coming together to make a change. We also sit on a number of government and industry task forces and workshops, and we presented to the All-Parliamentary Group on Electric Vehicles. What gives us strength is having members on board, actually, so that we can truly be representative of EV drivers in England. We seem to as well have become the go-to for media on EV driver-related issues. That's online, in print, radio and some television. We've got plenty more activities planned for the autumn months as well. So what about this Chargepoint series? Well, it's really been developed in the very spirit of that initial chat between Bridget and Alan, and the change that a simple conversation can bring about. So we're hosting a series of live video sessions with our honorary members, Ade being one of them, and EVA advocates. The aim is for you as participants and listeners to learn more, to connect and to feel empowered to be EV champions in your own local communities, even if that's something as simple as starting a conversation about electric cars with your friends or family. So today marks the inaugural instalment of our new series, and I can't wait for Ade to join us very, very soon. But what about our plans? How are we going to charge ahead into the autumn and beyond? Our next Chargepoint chat will be with the indomitable, I knew I shouldn't have tried to say that word, Robert Llewellyn, the fantastic Robert Llewellyn. We'll be at Fully Charged Live outside in early September, so please do stop by our booth and say hello. And we'll be at a host of other national, regional and local EV events, so do look out for us. We're developing a really exciting EV awareness campaign with some famous faces, so that will be coming soon, and that will include some of our honorary members as well. And if you're not a member of Electric Vehicle Association England, please do consider joining. Membership is £20 a year, and members get £50 off any charger on the Right Charge website, and also any £50 off a subscription to Onto. We have a pipeline of other membership benefits bubbling away that we'll be able to announce soon. In summary then, EVA England is a vehicle for consumer-focused action. Thanks so much for bearing with me before we meet Ade. If we could just now go into a brief clip of some of Ade's very recent work, at which point I'll hand over to Alan to introduce Ade.
It was so beautiful, so thick a forest.
And it's gone. It's very, very obvious there's change happening.
Is it too late to fix this?
No. We have an amazing capacity to do things extraordinarily quickly.
So instead of cutting down rainforests, you've got this?
Yeah, exactly.
Who says you can't have your cake and eat it?
Climate change, Ade on the front line, on BBC Two and iFair.
We can't hear Alan at the moment.
Hi there, unfortunately Alan's on mute at the moment. Alan, can you unmute yourself?
Right, shall I start again?
Please do.
So thank you, Jill, for that very clear introduction. I'm so sorry about my technical inabilities. So I'm really delighted to introduce my colleague, supporter and friend of some 9 years to this webinar. For those of you old enough to remember the song We Shall Overcome, which Ade himself is actually not quite, he embodies it Coming to London from Nigeria at age 3 after suffering polio, he had to face and overcome not just the otherness of racism, but also of being in calipers at the same time as desperately wanting to join in and play football. Some of his published children's books, The Cyborg Cat and The Rise of the Parsons Roan Gang, describe how he did just that. His list of overcoming obstacles seems endless. A Paralympic basketball medalist, gold at the 2005 Paralympic World Cup, TV presenter on Paralympics and disability sport, supporting multiple charities, particularly for Black disabled kids, for which he was awarded an MBE. He was even a TV actor at one time, less publicized, but has now gained huge respect for his BBC4 travel documentaries and recently a stunning, in both a good and an upsetting way, series on climate change. He never just seems to duck a challenge at all. Also, as a dedicated EV driver, new father, Children in Need live presenter, and more, he has now taken on chairing the online gatherings for the Independent Sage Committee on Climate Change. And that may be a challenge we all need to join him in. Last but not least, he's about to be one of the lead presenters at the 2021 Paralympics in Japan and is a founding honorary member of EVA England. So welcome, Ade.
I think we are just waiting for Ade to join us. So, Alan, can I find out a little bit more from you in the meantime about that conversation with Bridget, who is now the chair of EVA England? How did you meet? What did you talk about?
Bridget was what I won't say old, but a seasoned EV driver. She was in 10 years ago, right at the beginning. And I was a relatively new one with my first EV, i3, which had a relatively limited range compared to my later one. And we, I won't name the company, but some of you might be able to guess if you're very sensitive, were on a motorway station. And again, we found it didn't work. People didn't answer the phone. We couldn't get anybody to start it. And we began to really think, how is it that this is happening when we so desperately need EVs to take off and people to feel confident about charging? So we talked, and actually we didn't talk, I mean, we forgot about it for a bit, except I took Bridget's name and address, and I think she hoped I'd forgotten. But then I approached Dan Caesar at Fully Charged and asked if they were in a sense running something like an EV association. And he said, no, not really. He said, why don't you talk to Dan at the Renewable Energy Association? So I met up with Dan and I said, well, is there an association? He said, no, there isn't really. There's lots of online chat groups, and there have been a number of people, somebody called Jill Noel, and one or two others, who've talked to me about wanting an association. Why don't you talk to them? And also talk to EVA Scotland, who've been running for a long time. So that's really how it got started. And then we started ringing you all round and nagging you all. And there we are. Hello, Eddie.
Hello. Hey, Alan. How are you?
I'm not bad, but good to see you. You've just missed my very, very flattering, not flattering, but my very personable description of you, but I'll tell you about it some other time.
My ears were burning.
I think we'll go straight over to you now, Eddie.
Great. So how are we going to do this then? Are you going to be doing the Q&A?
Well, Jill is there. I think if you could just say just a little bit about your experience of being an EV driver and just what it was like also doing all that work on climate change, just to kind of bed people in to the multiple experiences you've had, and then we could take it from there.
Okay. My experience as an EV driver. Well, I got my first EV car back in 2016. I bought a Tesla, and the main reason for me had been when I was driving a BM, and I just realized the impact. Well, I knew about the impact that combustion cars or ICE vehicles were having on the environment, and I needed to really put my money where my mouth was and really start taking responsibility and doing something that was going to make a difference. And I think one of the things with the whole climate change issue and the whole problem is it can feel really overwhelming. It can feel like it's such a huge challenge that each of us as individuals find it really difficult to know where our place is and what we can do. And I just thought, well, this is one small thing that I, as an individual, can do. I was fortunate enough to have the financial means to be able to get a Tesla. So I thought, well, or to get an EV car. So I thought, well, why not? You know, why not? I got a really decent part exchange deal on my car. And then once I got it, I just totally fell in love with it. I mean, it was the initial thing was getting used to not having engine sound. But that didn't take long. That took maybe a day or so to get used to. I'm definitely a computer geek. I love technology, and that's one of the things with EV. They're packed with technology, so that satisfied that side of me. I had range anxiety, don't get me wrong, and if there was one thing I would definitely do now, if when I look to buy or update my EV, is I would go for the longest range possible, or the longest range that I could afford. Having said that, a lot of my range anxiety has kind of just been it's probably just because I've been so used to using combustion cars, and just it's been more in my mind, because I've only ever once really gone down to the wire and thought that I was going to run out of charge, and that was mainly because I had problems with my sat nav, and I couldn't find the blasted Tesla supercharger at Scotch Corner. I went round and round that roundabout so many times trying to find that one, but now I know where it is. It's fine. But generally, I've always been able to find a place to charge my car. I drive up to Edinburgh quite a few times because my in-laws, my wife's family are based up there, and I've had no issue driving up there. We went to Cornwall last weekend, and I was sort of a little bit freaking out because we got to the hotel when I was on about 20 miles left on my charge, and I couldn't work out where the nearest supercharger was, but there was so many destination chargers in the area that it was absolutely fine. So in terms of range anxiety, I think it's something that we need to get over. Yes, there needs to be more charging points around the country as more people get EVs, but it's definitely something that I've not had a problem with. And if anyone should be worried about it, it's someone who's a wheelchair user, because the last person I want to happen to me as someone in a wheelchair is to be stranded on the motorway in the middle of nowhere. So if I can get around in an EV and not worry about range, then I think most people should be fine. So all in all, I've loved it. As Alan mentioned as well, I went on to last year or the year before, I started filming a series on climate change, and I did that because I felt it was it's something that is so important. It's the biggest challenge that mankind, or that the human race faces today, and it's a serious problem. And I've felt that the whole issue of climate change, it's not something that's new. We've known about it for decades. And maybe in the last 5 to 10 years, it's really started to become more prominent. But I think the documentaries that I've seen and the way that the climate change story has been told has always been based around science. And don't get me wrong, I think science is important. Science is the basis of pretty much everything that the human race looks at when it comes to progress or logical progress. But I wanted to make a documentary series that, one, carried hope, but two, was based on the human stories. I wanted to go and see how humans, individuals, people who are living on the front line, how they were being directly impacted by climate change. I wanted to give them a voice to tell us living in the UK, who are living relatively comfortable lives, and we are quite far away from where a lot of the biggest damage to climate change is happening. And I wanted them to tell their stories, and because I felt that's the only way that people will really connect with it, by humanizing the story, by showing someone like Gladys Habu in the Solomon Islands, whose islands are literally disappearing because of sea level rise. You know, I mean, just really get that into your head. Your home, which was there, you know, 5-10 years ago, not just your house, but the whole island has gone. You know, and it's gone because of things that we are doing as a human race that we can easily, well, not easy, but we can rectify. So I wanted to tell those stories. And I also wanted to show that there was hope. Like, for instance, when I went to Bhutan and met the Prime Minister of Bhutan, who showed the philosophy and what the thinking of the Bhutanese government and the Bhutanese people, where their life is, their philosophy or their ethos is more based around gross national happiness and not gross national production. It's not about economy. It's about what makes the people happy. And they are one of the few, I think there's only one other country other than Bhutan that has a negative, that is sucking in more carbon than they're producing. You know, they are incredible, and that's because their king has had a policy for the last 30 years. Just one simple thing. I mean, there's many things that they do. They're a smaller economy, a smaller country, and you know they're not totally focused on having this economy that's about constant growth. But one policy that they've done is every year they have a national tree planting day. And they've had that for about 40 years. Can you imagine if we did that in the UK? Just one day a year where everybody in the country planted a tree. And we did that, and if we'd been doing that for the last 40 years, the kind of, just that alone, the type of impact. So for me, the documentary that I made was about telling human stories and giving hope and showing people that, yes, climate change is a huge challenge, but together, you know, we can, with science, with human endeavor, we can combat this, and we can change it, and we can make a better life for people in the future. And one of my ways that I'm tackling it myself is by driving an EV.
That's brilliant, Ade. Thanks so much. And thanks again for joining us. I truly thought that your Frontline series was astonishing. It was shocking, but it gave some hope. And a couple of points that stood out for me, one of them was with the Huskies, and there's physiologically, or anyway, their body changes as a result of climate change. And it's those almost unexpected consequences of climate change that people might not necessarily, you know, first think about at all. And then also, you know, in Bangladesh, seeing the farmer and his family whose farm was lost under the water. And it is, as you say, humanizing that and seeing climate change and the devastation in action is really, really powerful. So thank you so much. If I can just go on to a few questions then, Ade, if that's all right. Thank you. So, and I think you've almost touched on this, but what is the one single most important action that an individual can take to have a collective impact in the fight against climate change? Wow,
that's a big question. I mean, there are many individual things that you can do, and I'm certainly not someone who preaches and says to people, you must do this, you must do that. I don't come from that direction. And personally, this is what I've done. I drive an EV, but I don't drive it that much. You know, when I can push to places in my wheelchair or use public transport, I will do that, because I think the less cars on the road, the better. And I also think for your own personal health, it's better. I eat far less meat. I'm pretty much vegetarian now, because of the impacts that animal production has on the planet. I'm trying to not fly as much, but I think there also needs to be pressure put on the aviation industry to really look for an alternative to fossil fuels as a fuel for their airplanes. And I know that the aviation industry may say, well, this is a big thing, but the fact is, you know, they've known about climate change for many decades, and they could have been working on an alternative source and looking at making electric planes or hydrogen fuel planes or alternative sources of energy. I'm not an engineer or a scientist, but I feel there has been the time to make those steps. I know Rolls-Royce are working on a plane, and they're going to try and break the speed barrier with their new electric plane. And I know there's talk of new commercial electric planes coming out next year. But to me, it's taken far too long for that to happen. And when I think about it, hopefully I get my dates right, but I think the Wright brothers, they flew their first plane, it was 1903 or 1902, and then between that time and 1969, we went from this plane that was this rickety plane that was built by the Wright brothers that took flight for the first time, to 1969 sending a man or a craft onto the moon. You know, in that time, we were able to go from seriously primitive technology to being able to land on the moon. And I would have thought from between 1969 and 2021, we could have come up with an alternative to fossil fuels to fly in planes. But having said all of that, I think the one biggest thing you can do is educate yourself. I'm so surprised at how many people do not really know about so many things to do with our planet. I feel so many people take for granted where the electricity comes from that powers their house, how the water gets to their taps. You know, I think we have to educate ourselves and understand the importance of living with our planet and not living to take from our planet.
Yeah, thanks, Ade. I think you're absolutely right. We take so much for granted, and we just assume that everything is literally on tap, and we consume so much, you know, constantly. So that's really insightful. Thank you. And I think with EVA England as well, you know, we know that absolutely we'd say if you can walk, if you can ride your bicycle somewhere, take public transport, especially if it's electric, battery electric, that's fantastic. But then if you do have to drive a car, then why, you know, if you can, let's have a look at a battery electric vehicle for you, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I understand there are families, there are people who have long commutes. So not everybody can walk, and for some people it is far easier to use their cars. And so, yes, in that case, then do it via an EV, and I hope, you know, through economics, you know, supply and demand, the more people that buy EVs, the price will come down. Because I get it. For the average family, buying an EV is expensive, and we really need to get that price down. Whether it's the government provides some subsidies or some way, but it also takes for us, the people who are lucky enough to be able to afford to get EVs, to get EVs, because the more of us that do it, the more it will bring the price down.
Yeah, so true, Ade. And it is the case that a lot of lease deals now for electric cars can be price comparable with petrol and diesel equivalents. And the more of us that do drive electric, those cars will filter down to the second and third hand markets. So it's going to become more affordable across more people, I hope, very soon. And it depends on the range you're looking for as well. You can pick up a £5,000 battery electric vehicle on the second-hand market these days, which is still a lot of money. But again, it's all going to come down. Shall I go on to the next question then, Ade?
Yes.
So, in your view, how usable is the public charging network for those with a disability? What is being done to change this, and what part will legislation need to play?
Another big question. So I have to be careful when I talk about this, because and what people need to understand is there's not a one size fits all when it comes to disability. So what I'm capable of doing and what works for me doesn't necessarily work for all disabled people. As many people have watched me on TV, if you've seen some of the places that I've been fortunate enough to travel to, they're pretty inhospitable, climbing up volcanoes and, going to Svalbard, traveling to places that are minus 20, 30 degrees below zero. So I'm a very able disabled person. I mean, I could go into the whole politics of disability, but that's a whole nother thing altogether. So what I would say is there is still a lot of work to do to make the charging network accessible. There's definitely been plenty of superchargers that I've gone to that have been quite hard work for me to have enough space for my wheelchair and the car, and also to reach the charging the charging cable to put it into my car. So that could be made easier, and definitely the same too with destination chargers. It was only the other day when I was in Cornwall, I was using the destination charger, and another guy pulled up in another EV, and the moment he pulled up, it then became quite tricky, and I could see he was worried that I was going to scratch his car with my wheelchair because we were so quite close. So I think the mindset, well, governments have to start employing people with knowledge of what disability is when you're creating the charge network, because I think a lot of these things are just made and they're not really thought about the bigger picture. So in terms of government, you need to have a government that has a broader group of people that represent different backgrounds and different abilities in order for them to have the knowledge. Because if the government don't know what someone like me in a wheelchair needs, or someone who's visually impaired, well, not a visually impaired person, but someone with maybe a high level break as a spinal cord injury, if they don't know what those people need, how can they create the network that is right for them? So yeah, they need to have someone on their group or in the government that is lobbying them, that knows what they're talking about. And yeah, in terms of legislation, it should be part of the Disability Discrimination Act. That should come underneath that umbrella of making sure everything is accessible for everyone.
Thanks, Ade. Yeah, my colleague actually has just pointed out in the chat that that EVA England we're working with the Department for Transport and Motability on accessibility standards. So hopefully things, will start to improve, and that consultation kind of phase will be really, really inclusive to understand so many different needs.
Yeah, Jill, it's just some of the things are it's just such simple things that can be done to make these chargers accessible. Some of the chargers are a little bit too high. you know, so they could be put down a little bit lower. You know, some of them, they put these really nice, neat pavements right next to where your car is parked with cobblestones, so you're trying to get your wheelchair out and it's virtually impossible. You know, it's just these really, really simple things. And I sometimes think people are the mindset of, if we're going to make something accessible for everyone, it's going to take massive changes. It isn't. Half the time it's just something really small.
Thanks, Ade. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So next question then. Do you think that the government and private investors are doing enough to provide adequate public charging facilities to a similar standard as that enjoyed by petrol and diesel drivers?
From my point of view, from being outside government and not knowing what they're working on or what their plans are, I would say no. You know, and maybe it would be naive to think they are in terms, or they would be prioritizing EV, because obviously at the moment still there are far more ICE cars on the road. So that's where that's where their money is. They know they have to change. And I suppose they've got to walk this delicate tightrope of making sure they future-proof the country, but not, and excuse my terminology, but not pissing off the ICE drivers. I mean, for me personally, if I had anything to do with it, I would be saying that, look, EV, hydrogen, alternative fuels, anything that gets us away from fossil fuels, cleaner energy is the future. And we should really be investing in our future. We shouldn't wait for there to be a critical mass of EV cars on the road and then respond. We should be proactive as a government. So I really think it's so important that they do more. They can always do more.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ade. A question from somebody in our audience now. If you have home charging, did you find it easy to install an accessible home charging point?
Yeah. So my home charging point, I always think I'm kind of the wrong person when it comes to it's going to sound counterintuitive, but the wrong person when it comes to accessibility matters, simply because I've been so used to living in a world that is not built for me. I've ended up making do, and I know where I've got a home charger, and I know it's not right. And it is a pain in the ass. Fortunately, I can use one leg to balance, and sometimes I hop into this narrow space to plug my car in. And I did it because at that point of time, my driveway wasn't quite right, and I just wanted to get a home charger in. And most people who drive EVs will know that once you have a home charger, it's a game changer. You know, it's such a game changer in terms of, you know, you can leave home and you've got a full charge. When you're constantly thinking about where you're going to go to get your car charged before you even start your journey, that's a real hassle, and that really leads to range anxiety. But yeah, I will make my charger accessible. It was just waiting for a point where we could get our driveway done in order to make it better. But yeah, I think it's another thing that can be looked at. There must be other ways actually to make home chargers even more accessible than they are. You know, I still think there's not enough consultancy with people with disabilities to make things far easier. So yeah, in answer to your question, mine isn't in an accessible place, but I can use it.
Okay, thanks, Ade. So I'd like to bring Alan back in, if I may, now. And Ade, I think Alan has a question for you.
Ade, just thought I'd ask you a really difficult question, and I wouldn't think you'd expect less of me. But you know, you talked about education, and the problem with education is that when people are very frightened, they won't want to learn and they won't take new information in. Now, the problem, it seems to me, when looking at these amazing trips that you've played to some of the worst impacts of climate change, plus some of the best attempts people have made to try and counter it, most people, as you know, have learnt not to think about it still, or to think that it's somewhere else or somebody else. I suppose my question is, when you face that, when you face people not wanting to think about it, firstly, how does it feel to you, knowing actually what's happening? And secondly, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect any less.
Oh, you'd like that?
Than a complicated question like that. It's a great point, and it's a big source of frustration, trying to get people to deal with hard issues, you know, and I understand the dynamics and the way the human psyche thinks. We are a social species first, intellectual second. You know, for us, what drives us?
Fantastic.
What drives us is what our friends think, how we can, you know, please the bigger group, rather than intellectualizing things and looking at the facts, because it takes more work. But that's what it boils down to. So the only way, I mean, there's a couple of things. One, I point to COVID, and I show, I think COVID is an example of how something that happens thousands and thousands of miles away can impact the whole world, can literally bring the whole world to its knees. So we can no longer close our eyes and think that we are living in this safe bubble of the UK that's isolated from the rest of the world. You know, we've had a prime example last year of something that can literally, it happened in China. I mean, we won't really know until for a few years, until there's more investigations done where it originated from. But put that to one side. China's 10 hours it's 10 hours time difference from us, you know, 15, 16 hours in a plane, thousands of miles away. Yet we have had thousands of deaths because of that impact. So we can't close our eyes. We have to open our eyes, you know, and I'm going to use a term that a lot of people, that's been much maligned over the last year or so, but it's the purpose of this word is exactly for this. We have to be woke. You have to be awake to what is happening in this world. And secondly, I think it's about leadership, and those of us who have the knowledge, who have the experience, it's our job to work as hard as we possibly can to try and find the best language, the best way to educate others. You know, if you have that opportunity, that's in our gift to pass that on. We can't just be smug and say, you know, look at us, we're saving the world, and look at you, other minions, just destroying the planet. We're all in this together.
Fantastic answer, Ade. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Fantastic answer.
Thank you so much, Ade. And we are indeed all in it together. And that brings us to the end of our inaugural Chargepoint chat with you, Ade Adepitan. Thank you so much for joining us as an EVA England honorary member, and so much more. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, and of course, please do watch at your leisure as well. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Ade.
Thanks.